for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome aboard. And I've got a great guest today. Doug Wead is the author of Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. Doug has interviewed the president many times. He's interviewed members of his family. So pull up your seat. We're going to get a firsthand look at what's going on in there. Doug, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Charles.
Doug, I want to just start by talking a little bit about you. You've interviewed several presidents and their families. How did you get into this, and a little bit about your background and what that's been like?
Well, I got involved in charitable work, and I founded Save the Refugees in 1979, and that led to Mercy Corps. Was a founding board member of Mercy Corps, which has now given $2 or $3 billion of food and medicine around the world. And
wow.
In the process, we held an East Room event with Rosalind Carter, and then met President Carter, did similar events with Nancy Reagan, and wrote President Reagan's campaign biography, and it went on from there.
Excellent. And you've been in the White House meeting presidents from Reagan right up to through Obama and now Trump.
I haven't met President Obama.
Did not, okay.
But interviewed both of the Bush presidents, co-authored a book with one of the Bush presidents, served on White House staff with them. So,
all right. Well, you've been around the White House, and you've had a firsthand look at President Trump. There is so much information, and shall I suggest disinformation, about President Trump that swirls around him, has done so since the day he was elected right up till today. So it's very difficult for me, or for all of us kind of operating outside of the firmament here, to understand what's really going on in that White House. The image that has been often projected by the mainstream media, for lack of a better word, is a administration that's in a constant state of chaos, with a president who has a very short attention span and who is kind of a simplistic person. Is that, where does that fall in terms of the actual truth about the man and the president?
I was very impressed by Donald Trump and a bit surprised. I see calculation behind the chaos far more than I expected. I expected some because I've worked on senior staff in the White House, but Sun Tzu once wrote that out of chaos comes opportunity. That's certainly the case with Donald Trump. He'll blow something up and then he'll refix it. NATO's an example. He just blew it up. The media went crazy. What's he doing? This is our oldest alliance. These are our best friends. And the Pentagon came in and the generals lectured him like he was a little boy. These are our friends, sir. And he was saying, well, if they're our friends, why are they cheating us? Why do they sign something and they don't keep their word? And the end result is he raised $100 billion for NATO. He saved NATO and turned it around. And that's very typically Donald Trump. I could give you a dozen illustrations just like it.
No, it's an incredible story. And in fact, recently, German Ambassador Grenell has said that for the first time after many presidents have rattled the saber in Germany, he asked them to pay their fair share of NATO. Germany is now paying hundreds of millions of dollars toward the NATO budget, and they are beginning to pony up. They may not like Trump, and they may make jokes about him, in conversation, but they're starting to play ball with him in terms of because they know that he means business on getting them to take responsibility for their own defense.
Same thing with USMCA, which looks like it's going to happen now. Same thing. NAFTA, Charles, think of this. NAFTA is 17,000 pages. The Bible is 1,000 pages. So what that means is nobody ever read NAFTA. They just read their 11 pages that they contributed. And the conservatives were all upset. Everybody said, oh, this is terrible. He's not a free trader. He's broken the free trade agreement. But it wasn't. It doesn't take 17,000 pages to write free trade. It was a terrible agreement. Now the Mexicans, Canadians, Americans like his agreement much, much better. It's better for America, better for everybody. But that's, again, typical. He blows it up and then he fixes it.
Oh, I mean, this is very typical in that nobody said he could change the NAFTA accords, and yet he was able to negotiate with Canada and Mexico to do just that. and that it looks terrible, I think, for the Pelosi Congress to have not taken action on this for a whole year. All of a sudden, now they're taking action because they're also submitting articles of impeachment, maybe, and because they have to go back to their constituents and say they did something, as opposed to just focusing, since they were elected, on nothing but impeachment. And so it looks like that is going to happen. It is, and I mean, maybe this is a more sinister plot on my part, but some people say the reason she held it up is because she knew that it would be a great economic boost, and they don't want Trump to have a good economy going into the next election, which to me would be, so despicable. I mean, to hurt working people and to stop people from getting jobs and to hurt the country just to win the election.
Yeah,
But and I'm not saying they are doing that, but that's been the scuttlebutt among people in my circles on the conservative side.
yeah, and you hear comedians wishing for a recession. You know,
Oh yeah,
the media would have loved Herbert Hoover. He was a compassionate man. He fed Europe after World War I. He was a brilliant engineer. He was very courtly, very presidential, very dignified. But we suffered under the Great Depression. Hoovervilles, they called them. They sprang up near garbage dumps, near the major cities. People couldn't keep their homes. So they lived in these garbage dumps without running water, without sewage, without electricity. That's the kind of misery. 17 million unemployed. That's what late night comedians are saying. We wish we'd have another recession.
oh yeah,
We
it's
take for
disgusting.
granted peace and prosperity is what Donald Trump's given us. The first president in 40 years not to have invaded somebody. Think of that. Great economy, 7 million unfilled jobs. That's the population of the state of Indiana. Everything Hubert Humphrey and LBJ ever would have dreamed for the poorest of the poor in this country has happened under Donald Trump. That's the gold standard for a president, peace and prosperity.
Right, and I think that what is particularly worrisome for for certainly the left wing of the Democratic Party, which seems to have taken over the main locus of the party at this point, is that he is actually improving job numbers and prosperity for minorities in this country, and his ratings are going up, particularly among Black men, and that is like a devastating piece of information because that's a big part of their base, and that a lot of they've invested so much into trying to portray Trump and Republicans before him as being racist and having something against Black people and all that kind of cant. So, this is I think that President Trump stands to make historic gains in the minority community in this next election. I think it's going to be a huge shock to the liberal establishment when he does.
He has such joy over those numbers. It's
Oh, he
interesting to see. And he's
constantly
so
talks about it.
happy that that's happened. And he was so thrilled with the First Step Act, where he released more people from prison for nonviolent crimes. These were people who've been put in prison, the key thrown away because of marijuana, and
Oh, good.
releasing some 20,000 of these people, 90% of them African Americans. There's no wonder that there's a fresh appreciation for him. That was something Barack Obama didn't do for
Right.
them. So it's a fascinating presidency. And Charles, I enjoyed getting the inside story of the kids and raiding the refrigerator in the middle of the night in the White House and playing
Oh, that's
hide and
fun.
go seek among the grandchildren. That was just fun for me to get those stories.
So talk a little bit about that and about Donald Trump as a family man. Are his children involved? Are they at the White House visiting? I mean, how is his son, Barron? I mean, he's obviously and rightfully his parents keep him out of the media, but what's that like?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, Tiffany, I was the only journalist to interview Tiffany since her father won the
Mhm.
presidency. And I've got a great chapter in the book about her. She's hilarious. Anyway, she's going to Georgetown Law School. So she visits the White House every weekend and visits with Melania, and Barron's become her best friend. He's into soccer. But there's a
Mhm.
great story in the book on the second night when they just move into the White House. The families all gathered in the state dining room for a quiet dinner together, the adults. The kids, 8 grandkids then, are just screaming and running through the state floor, playing a rousing game of hide and go seek with Uncle Barron, who's chasing them out behind drapes in the blue room and under chairs in the red room. And Barron hears this big exclamation from the state dining room. He comes running in. What? They say, well, we just got news. Laura's going to have a baby. He said, oh, okay. And then he's running off to continue the game. It's fun to record the family history.
That's nice. And I think that even Hillary Clinton admitted during the debate that Trump is very close to his children and, is very involved in them. And partially that might even be a little political when it comes to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, because given the kind of the leaks and the betrayals that seem to be around him, they're probably the only people that he can absolutely trust.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ivanka is very impressive. She's brilliant and she's very beautiful and tall. And when she comes into a room, it's just quite stunning. And then what really throws you is she's so humble and gracious. It just knocks you over. The president told me that when they were in business together, that they would bring clients into a boardroom and Ivanka would close them before they could sit down at the conference table. And they actually put Ivanka in charge of when tax reform happened. They gave her the most difficult senators and congressmen that they had to sway. She landed every one of them. And Jared is brilliant. Some conservatives thought, oh, he's a liberal mole. He's brilliant and a great help to his father. Once his father-in-law makes a decision, Jared's 100% behind it. But he wants to make sure the president hears all the arguments on all sides of an issue.
Excellent. And I think it's also safe to say that there has been no president in American history, maybe with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, that has faced the kind of opposition that Trump has faced in terms of their willingness to go beyond the law. In many cases, we've seen some of this in the Inspector General's report, which is devastating to Trump's enemies, I would argue. In that they literally have people that President Trump has euphemistically called the deep state. And I think that's a pretty fair characterization. People in the FBI, people in the Department of Justice, who have literally tried to sabotage this president even before he was elected, who were spying on him, who were putting out false stories, who had complicity in the media, the media, it's become almost a routine matter. And you can speak to this as a New York Times guy, that they run a story based on one anonymous source. I mean, since when does that become de rigueur in journalism?
Yeah, it's become very violent. My life has been threatened 3 times now when it was learned this book was coming out and trying to stop its publication. My children's lives were threatened. They were named, and details about their life that an ordinary person wouldn't have. And this, if the book went to publication, my publisher offered to withdraw the book, said, if you want, we won't publish the book. My kids were unanimous. No, we believe in free speech. You got to do it, Dad. And we went ahead and we published it. But the left has become increasingly violent. I saw this professor from Stanford University attack the president's 13-year-old son, and she turned so angry and vicious. I thought, what's the matter with you? Don't you have children? She said she hated Trump so badly that she couldn't walk on the sidewalk outside his hotel, and yet she's going to tell us who the president should be and who should be impeached. And I love Stanford. It's a great school, but in the 1960s, Stanford had one of their professors made millions of dollars predicting that the United States would end in the 1970s by overpopulation and hundreds of millions of Americans would starve to death. So this is a school even now that teaches climate change will destroy the world in 6 years, but they signed their football coach to a 5-year, $4 million a year contract. So
I think you're talking about Ehrlich, right?
Figure that out.
And also Obama, the big climate change guy, just spent, I think, $10 million for a house right on the beach in Martha's Vineyard. I mean, if he's worrying about the rising sea levels, I mean, I don't know.
And
but
Elizabeth Warren, wanting free
Oh,
education for students. She's getting $350,000 a year to teach one class.
oh, you don't even
And
know the beginning of that. I mean, and her husband is getting another 350 for teaching one class, and they get a free house. I
so
mean,
they want the government to
and they're
pay.
wondering why, college costs are so high. I mean, anyway, but yeah, I think that she has jumped the shark with this $52 trillion healthcare proposal, which is even too much for most liberals.
Yeah, I think the president was holding his fire, hoping that she would win the nomination.
Right, exactly. So, and yet, since as going back to what I was saying, that this subversive, and I do call it subversive, actions by various people inside the FBI and the Department of Justice to literally stop Trump and to maybe, I don't know, take him out of office by any means. It has run right through the Mueller report and right up till today when they are now on the verge of impeaching him in the House. How does Donald Trump as a person, let alone as a president, deal with this every day and stay positive? And he maintains a level of energy for a man his age that is just inspirational. How does he do it?
Yeah, it's beyond me. And he says, and he admitted to me several times that he didn't think it was normal, that he thinks anybody else would break under this. But stop and think, all his life, he was almost nerdy. He would clip these articles out of the newspapers in the morning when Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric were crawling around on the floor under his desk and were little children. He was clipping before there was an internet and filing in hard copy files the terrible things the US government was doing, hoping that someone would run for president and clean this mess up and end the crony capitalism, as he calls it. And nobody ever did. So
Right.
this has been a lifetime in the making, and he's willing to go through the hell to be able to do the things he can do day by day to make America better.
And I think that speaking for probably millions of Americans, I am very grateful that he is doing it. And I think that here is a man who has had every benefit in life. I mean, he's famous, he's wealthy, he's got a great family, he's had a fantastic life. He's in his early 70s, and I think that he feels like at this stage in his life, he wants to do something beyond himself and give something back and make a difference in the world. And and people say, oh well, he's getting emoluments because some, Saudi Arabian prince stays at his hotel. I think Trump is losing money by doing this. I mean, Ivanka had us close the doors of her company because of boycotts. I mean, he's not making any. He's made his money. He doesn't need money. He's uh, he's doing it because he feels a call of duty to do it. And to my way of thinking, he's very uncorrupted in that way. I mean, Obama he just got like a $30 million book deal. I mean, if Trump doesn't need to think about those things. He's already got that. He did it already before he entered in. He didn't take the big money from the lobbyists and the corporations to run. He had money, and he did it all on his own. So to me, this is a very unique situation, one that it's unprecedented actually in modern times.
You're absolutely right. And he's understood the swamp in a way that nobody else did. I spent 40 years in the Bush world and came away deeply troubled by crony capitalism. What happens is they use regulations to keep you, Charles, from starting your own company. The name of the game is monopoly. And then after they've got their monopoly going, there's a recession and they pass, doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, a stimulus bill. And the stimulus bill exempts those big monopolies from those very regulations that they passed to keep you out. And then they're multinational. And then they're dealing with China. Well, he's seen all of this. And he knows that one company gets $100 million from the Federal Reserve at 0% interest. You have to borrow and pay interest through the nose as a new business loan. He knows how they use the Import-Export Bank. And he was fed up with it. And he's the perfect man to deliver us from this problem. At one point, he was so frustrated building buildings. The only place he could get windows was in China. He said, there's nowhere else in the world. China's the only place on earth where I can buy the windows frames for these new buildings. And so he's breaking the dishes and turning over the tables and returning free markets and allowing the middle class in America to participate for the first time in years.
And he's protecting American labor and American industry with a reasonable level of trade advantages and tariffs. And now I understand that China is on the verge of signing an agreement.
Yeah.
He just signed an executive order offering 12-week paid leave for federal employees who have a baby or by birth or adoption.
Yeah.
He wants that to be translated to the whole country. Nancy Pelosi held that one up. That's something that I wonder if anyone's going to ask her about women on that one, right? But the point is that these are extraordinary accomplishments, and yet most people don't even know it's happening because the New York Times doesn't mention it.
Yep. The executive order on anti-Semitism, it goes on and on and on. It's
Sure.
so typical of him. They're impeaching him, but he's using the moment to pass USMCA. He's using the moment. He did Russian collusion. Jared said Russian collusion, while the whole media was focused on Russian collusion, we were able to turn around the American economy. Under normal circumstances, they would have been on top of us, watching every deregulation and making a big story out of it. Instead, they were following this ridiculous story, and we were able to turn around the American economy.
And I hope that eventually there is a full exposure of this, but right now it's just as well to focus on the positive and on the upcoming election. And yet there does look to be almost a potential impeachment coming up. Now, according to the New York Times today, this morning, they had a whole staff of reporters interview congressmen from around the country on where they stood on this. Not a single Republican is going to vote for it. And 10 Democrats have said they're not going to vote for it. 50 other Democrats, they couldn't find them. They're hiding under their desks.
I didn't hear that.
So it tells me that, this is in today's paper. And New York Times, too. This isn't some right-wing, conspiracy. It tells me that their impeachment might be in trouble and that it may not happen, heaven willing. What do you think about that? And do you think it's going to happen? And if it happens, what do you think is going to be the impact?
Well, I think it has backfired on him from the numbers that I've seen, and I think that's what will happen. Ironically, Russian collusion inoculated Donald Trump from the very beginning because it was so ridiculous. I mean, if the president of the United States is a Russian spy, that's one of the greatest events of world history. That's equal to landing a man on the moon. That's like Columbus's voyage. That's like the assassination of Julius Caesar. It was one of the greatest moments of all world history. And of course, it's ridiculous. Jared told me that as when the Trump kids would travel all over the world in 2017, 18, they'd be pulled aside by a head of state. And the head of state would say, please tell your father when you get home, we're so sorry he's going through this Russian collusion nonsense. And when I heard those stories, I thought, well, of course, if you're the president of France or the prime minister of the UK, if you're Benjamin Netanyahu and you see an article in the New York Times, you say, I've known Trump all my life. What's this? You pick up the phone, you call the Mossad, you say, I want to know by 6 p.m. tonight, what is behind this story? What's going on? Because the future of your country your economy of your country, the defense of your country. There's 120 intelligence agencies in the world. Every one of them knew within 2 days what was true and false. They didn't wait 2 years for the Mueller report. So this ridiculous witch hunt or hoax that he experienced, I believe, inoculated him for impeachment because the people see it and say, yeah, sure. Yeah. Tell us about it.
No, I hope you're right. I believe you're right. I think that the enemies of Trump are depending on 2 years of propaganda over this. And I mean, I can tell you as a Boston resident, I'd get the alerts from the Boston Globe, these panting alerts. Oh, something with a collusion. And then the next day it's gone. I mean, it was constant drumbeat every single day
Yeah,
that they feel that this was such an investment, without, regardless of what Mueller said,
that's a good point.
that they're translating it to the Ukraine. Of course, Trump was colluding with Ukraine. I mean, they did it with Russia, even though the whole thing was debunked. Um, I think that if he is impeached, it's going to quickly be put aside by the Senate and forgotten. I think it's going to strengthen him next year, and I think it even could result in a in a Republican take back of the House, which would be a fantastic thing going into next year or into 2021. And I'm also encouraged by the great victory of Boris Johnson in Britain. That to
Yes.
me says, and everybody said, oh, he's going down. That says something a little bit there in terms of people want the best interests of their own respective countries. That's really, it's a very simple idea.
Yes, it
It's
is.
an idea presidents, Obama, I mean, going back, they've given lip service to it, but Trump really means it. He wants to put the interests of his own fellow citizens and his own nation before any other.
And
And
it's
he is doing that.
and it's a moral idea, Charles. It's the whole world came together in Warsaw back in the 1950s, uh, and all the airlines, El Al, Jewish Airlines, Air Argentina, Catholic Airlines, Islamic Airlines, American Airlines, they all came to Warsaw in a hotel room, and they knocked out this statement that the flight attendant gives you. And in that statement, it says, if the cabin should depressurize, an oxygen mask will appear above you. Place over your own mouth and breathe normally. If you're accompanying a child, put your own mask on first and then assist your child. Because a good Christian, Muslim, atheist, a good person, communist, capitalist, would die trying to help their child, and they can't do that. And that's what America First is about. It's not, as Trump explained it to me, it's not America only, but it's we've got to rebuild our infrastructure, or the environment is truly doomed, and the world's economy and defense is truly doomed. It's time for America to put on its own oxygen mask.
It makes obvious sense. It's a basic human understanding. The animal kingdom understands this. The bird protects its own eggs. I mean, and yet the globalists, the utopians, people who believe in some kind of fuzzy idea of world order, they are adamantly against this. They despise the issue and the question of sovereignty. And they are the core, I think, of the enemies here, and they are fierce. They're not taking any prisoners. So I pray for President Trump and his family every day in terms of what he's up against. So, Doug, I want to congratulate you for this excellent book. Talk about your book and where people can get it, how things are going in terms of your book tour and whatnot.
It's called Inside Trump's White House, and they can get it InsideTrumpsWhiteHouse.com, or go to Amazon or Costco or Walmart or Target or any bookstore. They're available there. Great stories, positive stories. The president let me interview anybody I want. I interviewed the whole family. Stories of Melania. She steals the whole show. She's a wonderful lady. She's mature and a gracious lady. But the president himself tweeted 3 times about the book and ended one of those tweets with, "Buy this book."
Good. Can't get better than that. And by the way, you can also get the book inside the White House, I'm sure. All right, Doug Wead, thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to be in touch with you for a follow-up at some point as the campaign continues. And have a great day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.